Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmenencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to help support the show by becoming a premium member, please go to dogmenencounters.com/podcast to sign up. Memberships are only $2.99 a month. By becoming a premium member, you'll be able to download episodes onto your mobile device and listen to them commercial-free wherever you go. Also, if you'd like to check out the new Dogman Encounters t-shirt store, please go to dogmenencounters.com/store and take a look around. Buying a t-shirt or sweatshirt there is another great way to help support the show. As always, thanks for listening. Alright, let's bring on tonight's guest. Tonight's guest is Matt. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vic. It's nice to be here.
Oh, it's great having you. Matt, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I'm from Long Island, New York. I'm 32 years old, and I have 2 kids.
Matt, you told me in the pre-interview that you've always been interested in wolves. Did the encounter we're going to talk about in a bit cause you to lose your interest in them?
Not at all. I've always had a love for animals as a whole, but wolves have always stuck out to me. So, with that being said, there's no way that my encounter could ever take that love from me.
Now that you had that encounter, I'll bet you're never going to look at wolves the same way now, are you?
Definitely I don't. I'll second look one if I ever see one in the wild, and make sure it doesn't stand up or anything of the sort.
Yeah, if it did stand up, that wouldn't be good. Your encounter happened on Long Island. A lot of people don't realize how much tree cover Long Island has. Please educate us on its topography.
For the most part, Long Island is very flat. There's one hill that's kind of in the center of the island, and it has a good amount of trees to it. It's more of a monument than anything else. Other than that, there's numerous state parks all throughout Long Island, some of which are close to where the encounter happened. And then the other ones are more beaches. Because of the wildlife in those areas, they say that they're state parks, so that way there's no hunting or anything of that kind.
When you look at its proximity to Manhattan, it's easy to think that it's just nothing but tall skyscrapers and no woods or anything like that, but yeah, that couldn't be further from the truth.
Definitely not. No, you can go and have a town and then have a stretch of highway with woods on either side of you before you get to the next town. In between the towns, if you take back roads, there's of course other little towns or shops, but there's still woods that surround you.
It's funny how our perceptions can clash with reality. We can be so sure we know the truth about something, but be so wrong at the same time.
Definitely.
You drive at night a lot. How often do thoughts of dogmen creep into your head when you're behind the wheel?
Not really a whole lot when I'm on Long Island. I think my encounter was almost one of a kind given the location. But as far as when I'm traveling out of state, and it's early in the morning, like 1 a.m., I think about it. Anytime I see a carcass on the side of the road or an abandoned car, right away I'm thinking something terrible happened here. I hope a dogman didn't come out and grab somebody, or is there going to be a dogman sniffing at this carcass as I'm driving up on it? But other than that, not a whole lot.
Well, when you have a traumatic experience like the one that we're going to talk about at such a young age the way you did, it's only expected to have dogmen in the back of your mind at pretty much any time like that, so yeah, that's what I would expect. Because of the potential danger they pose to humans, do you think all dogmen should be wiped off the face of the earth, or are you against that idea?
I am definitely against that idea. I believe that animals were here first, and we kind of took over their living space. So if you are unfortunate enough to come into an encounter with a dogman or with any type of predator for that matter, it's up to you as the person to kind of respect that animal and back off. And then if that animal or creature decides to attack you, then that's all on them. And there's really nothing you can do about it.
I like your outlook on things. That's impressive. Before you tell us about your encounter, Matt, please tell us about the area where your encounter happened.
The encounter happened in eastern Long Island. The town that I was in was East Moriches. It had one little main road that cut through the main part of town. And then it had a side road, which was the block that I lived off of. And in that area, it was very wooded. There was a apartment complex to the right if you were coming off of the main road. And there was water. But as far as being heavily populated, it wasn't really like that. There was definitely a lot more tree cover than anything else.
You just described that area as being heavily wooded. Did you have a healthy deer population in that area and or other sources of food a dogman could live on?
There were deer. They ventured into my property and the property in front of mine quite a bit. I remember seeing droppings and chewed up apples and things like that. Tracks, of course. Other than that, there was raccoons, rabbits. There were definitely a lot of stray dogs in the area, more from getting away from their owners. And so they would just happen to wander through the yard a couple of times. And then with the water being right down the block, it was very easy for animals to go there and drink and all that stuff. And there was also a high population of birds as well. My property was set back about a quarter mile off of the road, and it was a quarter-mile long driveway. It was a great driveway. Me and my brother used to ride our bikes up and down, and we used to play hockey right at the end of the driveway against our garage. From the garage to the left of it was the house, and it was a decent-sized house. I believe there was 3 or 4 bedrooms in it. The backyard was fairly big. Woods surrounded the entire property. There were trails in the back of the house that led towards the railroad track. From there, I didn't really go past the railroad tracks, being that young. It was kind of far from the house. In the front yard, everything was pretty much thorn bushes and trees. And my dad had trailblazed a path, and it was basically to get a lawnmower from the front yard of the house all the way down to the side yard along the driveway without having to go on the driveway. I don't know really why he did it, but he did. Other than that, it was pretty much wooded. There was another house that was walking distance about 10 minutes from us, and that was to the right of our house, facing the front yard. To the left, it was woods all the way into another small apartment complex that was built. I don't know really how far away that was from our house, but I know it was back there. And other than that, there really isn't much to tell about the property. There was definitely trees and apple trees and things of that nature. There was a little garden to the side of the house. In the woods, it was thick. It was very thick in there with thorn bushes. There were trails that weaved in and out. There's a lot of dirt biking on Long Island, and I guess at some point people made multiple trails so they could ride their dirt bikes. To the right of the front yard, if you walked out of the front door, there was this one trail. There was a big tree, and there was a trail. And the trail cut all the way through the neighbor's yard, which had a line of pine trees going down the side. And then from there, it went all the way back, and that stretched all the way back to the railroad track. Around the house to the back, there was a big deck that stretched the length of the house. The inside of the house, when you walked through, was a sliding door, and then you walked through another door into the main part of the house. To the left of the house, it was my parents' bedroom. Towards the front of the house, then all the way over to the other side, on the right side of the house. In the front, it was my brother's room, and then directly behind his room was my room. And my room was closest to the woods. There was about 4 to 5 feet of space between my window and the wood line. That's about as much as I can remember about the property.
Yeah, sounds like the perfect environment for a dogman. What more could a dogman want, unfortunately? All right, Matt, please tell us about your encounter. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
I was 9 years old. It was the summertime. Me and my brother were hanging out, and it was a nice day. And we went off into the woods to the side of the front yard. And we were just kind of walking around in there. The woods were great because as kids we played manhunt and we ran around. We had bows and arrows. My parents cut the arrows in half and put this big ball of duct tape on the end. And they did it for safety precautions, but I mean, we were kids, so to think that you're going to shoot a bow and you shoot the bow and the arrow goes 4 feet and then drops right in front of you kind of was a disappointment, but again, being kids, it was still fun at the same time. But me and my brother were in the woods. We were walking around. We were kind of more back towards the railroad tracks, and we hear something kind of crunching around. And at first it was like, okay, that's unusual, you know, like we knew the sounds that animals in the area made. At first, I thought it was a dog just kind of walking around through the leaves. Then we it was more my brother. He told me that it's weird out here. We need to start walking back to the house. And as he said that, this bone-shattering howl came out of nowhere. It sounded far away, but being a kid, my judgment of distance wasn't that great. So I thought it was a lot closer than it was. And then we heard things breaking. And we heard loud footsteps coming our way. And so my brother and I looked at each other and then both ran as fast as we could all the way back to the house. We came out of the trail and into the front yard, and we stopped and we turned. And we both were staring right into the woods and listening, and we didn't hear anything. And so I said to my brother, "What was that?" And he said, "I'm really not sure what that was, but I think we should go inside." So we went inside. A few days kind of passed, and then I went back into the woods by myself, kind of in the same area that we were. I had a little spot in the woods. I would like to go and take my bow and my half arrows and shoot at a tree. It was a pretty big pine tree, and it was big, so I knew I wasn't going to miss it. And I went in by myself. It was in the afternoon. It was light out. There were birds chirping. I could hear insects. It was a really beautiful summer day. And I was shooting for about a half an hour, and then something up in a tree caught my eye, and it was big and kind of black looking, almost like a shadow. And as I'm looking at it, it moved from one tree to the other, and it moved so quick, it was like a flash. And I was like, that's weird. And so I just went and I continued to shoot, and I ignored it. At some point, I realized that it was quiet, that there was nothing going on, that all the birds that were chirping stopped. at some point a hawk flew over my head before I saw this figure, and I didn't hear that hawk. They usually, when they fly overhead and they see something, they kind of squawk out that they see something. And I didn't hear them. I didn't see them. There were a couple of blue jays that were sitting in a tree. They were gone. And I didn't hear a thing. And at that point, I felt very uneasy, as if I shouldn't be there. So I collected my arrows, and I started walking back to the house. As I was walking back, I heard a loud thump, and then I heard leaves breaking, and kind of like branches kind of cracking and things of that nature. I looked around. I didn't see anything. I didn't smell anything. Nothing seemed off to me other than a feeling of me trespassing, sort of say, and quiet in the woods, which anybody that's been in the woods knows that that's not normal. So me being a kid, I got a little worried, and I picked up my pace, and I went quicker back to my house. I walked through the front yard and right inside. Then, as I got inside, I told my brother that the sound we heard of leaves breaking and branches cracking that we heard the other day, I heard that same exact sound. And him being a kid and me being a kid, he kind of just pushed it off and was like, oh well, don't go into the woods. And my brother is a couple of years older than I am. And so I didn't tell anybody else about it. My parents, more my mother, wasn't really happy when I would go off into the woods alone, because I did it a lot. I would go in and I would look for tracks. I used to really like to try to find rabbits. For some reason, I always thought that I could outrun a rabbit and I could catch it. And if I caught it, we could eat it. But I never did. I definitely tried, but I was never able to. So I didn't tell anybody about it. I kind of just went into my room and played a video game, and that was it. A few more days passed. And it was nighttime. It was earlier in the morning. It was probably around 2 to 3 a.m. I was sleeping, and I started hearing a growling sound and kind of scratching, and I woke up, and I was facing my wall. The way that my room was set up was when you walked in, to the left was a straight wall, and it had a dresser. Then to the right, there was a cutout for the closet. Then on the right wall was my bed. And then on the back wall of the room was a window. And the window was about 7 to 8 feet off the ground. And I had no blinds. My room was one of the few rooms that had no blinds in the house. I personally wanted it like that because I loved the woods. And I loved being able to, like, lay in my bed and look out my window and see the tops of the trees or the moonlight cutting through the trees. And to me, it was peaceful, and it put me to sleep. So I woke up from the sound outside of my window, and I was facing the wall when I heard it. Then I turned over, and I looked, and the first thing that I saw in my window were these pointy ears. And I kind of blinked and looked twice, and then everything else started to take shape. And this creature was sitting in my window, or standing and looking into my window, and it was absolutely terrifying to me, being a 9-year-old kid and not knowing what this thing was or how it even knew to look into my window or anything like that. And as I'm sitting there, I could see more and more of it because my eyes were adjusting to the dark. And there was a little light, coming through, so I was kind of able to make out some details, but it was very big. Its head was definitely a canine. It was a dark, almost space black. Like if you look up at the stars at night and all the black around the stars, that's what it looked like. That was the color. And its ears were pointed straight up, but facing the window. So the inside of his ears were pointing right at the window. His snout was long. At the end of his snout, there was a set of top teeth and a set of bottom teeth that came through its lips, and they were bright white. They were, if you put a fresh coat of white paint up on a wall and let the sun hit it, that's what it looked like. That's the best comparison that I could think of. And then I noticed its shoulders, and it had massive shoulders. And I couldn't see the rest of its body, so I assumed, given the height that it was at, it was about halfway in my window. It took up my entire window. It was probably around 8 to 8.5 feet tall. Then I saw his eyes. And his eyes were squinted, and they were focused on me. And I think that's why they were squinted, is because he was focusing so hard on me. And his eyes were a cloudy white color. I don't know if that's the color that his eyes normally are, or if that's the color that they were just based on reflections. But he was looking directly at me. And when I noticed that he was looking at me, I popped up. And as I popped up, he growled. It was a low, low, low growl. And between the growl and this creature looking at me, it shook my soul. My mother was very religious. She still is. We had to attend church every Sunday, and we had to sit through Sunday school and all that stuff that goes along with having religious parents, and everything that I thought I knew about God or Jesus or whatever your religion may be or not be was gone. It sucked it right out of my body, right out of my head. Everything that I thought I knew was gone. Every animal that I thought I knew, gone. I thought I knew this area that I lived in pretty well, considering I was always in the woods and always outside and always riding my bike up and down the road and driveway and wherever else. All that was just gone. And it scared me probably half to death, if not almost all the way. And as I'm sitting there and I'm sitting straight up in my bed and I'm looking at this thing, it looked like it smiled at me. And in my mind, I was like, scream. Just scream. And I couldn't. I couldn't even open my mouth. And it sat there and it looked at me what felt like a lifetime, but was only 10, 11, maybe 15 seconds at the most. And then it backed up off of the window. And as it backed off of the window, it kept looking at me and I could see its chest. So what I assumed was it was hunched over looking into my window. And its chest was big. It had big muscles on its chest. And I could see its skin from its chest, the way the light hit off the window or however that happened, I could see it. And it was like a gray-black color. And he had fur on his chest and covering his shoulders and his head. And his head was massive. If it wanted to, it could have broke right through my window and snatched me right out of my bed, and nobody would have had any idea what happened. But So as soon as he backed up and kind of turned around, I got right up. I wanted to see what this was. Even though I was so scared, I had a curiosity to know what this is. Like, how is this thing here? Is it like a mutated dog, or did, like, aliens drop this thing off? Like, what is this? So I got right up and I went right to my window. And as I got to my window, it was walking back into the woods. And like I said earlier, there was only a 4 or 5 foot gap between my window and the wood line. And it took one step and in the woods it went. And I had a couple of solid sized trees that were right there, and it was gone. It just vanished right into the trees. And I sat there looking through my window, and I almost wanted it to come back so I could see it again. But at the same time, in my brain, I knew I didn't want that to happen. But it went into the woods, it vanished. I stood at my window for about 20 minutes, seeing if I could see anything, an eye shine, a shadow move, anything. And I didn't. And I happened to see my clock. I had a little radio clock, a digital clock, and I saw the time, and it was 3:23 in the morning. And so I turned around, and I wanted to go and wake up my brother and see if he heard anything or anything like that. But I didn't do that because he would have got mad at me. And I wanted to go run into my parents' room and be like, do you know what I just saw? But again, I thought they were going to get mad at me. So I got into my bed and I put my back against the corner of my bed where my pillow was facing the window. And I sat there and just stared out my window and was waiting for this thing to come back. I had a blanket wrapped around me and my pillow was sitting on top of my lap. Then morning rolled around and I was a kid, so I was exhausted. As an adult, I can stay up for days at a time, but as a kid, I was exhausted and I had to go to school. I attended a summer school program, so I had to go to school. And so I went to school, and all day at school, that's all I thought about. And when I came home, I had mentioned it to my mother, and she told me that I was dreaming. And in my head, I was like, how do you know if I was dreaming or not? You weren't in there with me. If you were in there with me, you would have screamed at the top of your lungs. How do you know what was happening? I knew I wasn't dreaming. I knew what I saw. And after that, I didn't mention it to an adult. And a couple of days went by, maybe a week, and I mentioned it to my brother. And I said, you remember a while ago we were in the woods and something was chasing us and we ran all the way to the house? I was like, then you remember when I told you that I heard the same things happening again? And he kind of just looked at me and was like, yeah. And I was like, well, I saw this creature at my window. And he was right away. He was like, no, you didn't. That didn't happen. Don't say that. And so that kind of deterred me from telling anybody else about it. And I kind of just went through my life and grew up. We moved from that house about a year or so later. And every single day, I would wake up and look out my window to try to see something. Seeing this creature definitely stopped me from going into the woods as much. If I did, again, being a kid, I always made sure I had like a knife on me or my bow. Again, it was half-cut duct tape tipped arrows, but I'm a kid, so wasn't entirely sure what would happen if I shot it. Probably nothing. It would probably bounce off and I would get stared at. And so I didn't really go into the woods as much, and I kind of played more hockey than anything else. Then, like I said, a couple of years later, we moved from there, and we moved to another part of the town. and it wasn't as wooded. We were on a main street, kind of closer to where the school was. And I had a good amount of friends on that block, so we used to play hockey in the street, but I never told anybody about that. I tried to bring it up against my brother years later when I was in my early 20s, and then again recently, but when I was in my early 20s and I said it to him, even about the part where we were together, he told me that didn't happen. Now, either if he thought it didn't happen or if he didn't remember it, because we talk all the time about things that we've done as children, and some stuff I remember, some stuff he remembers, and then there are things that we both remember, but there are also so many things that he remembers that I don't, or I remember that he doesn't. And so I didn't know how to kind of accept what he was saying as far as he didn't remember or that didn't happen. So he was really the only person I would bring it up to. If I even had a thought to bring it up to my mom, I lost that thought right away. I had a girlfriend that I was thinking about bringing it up to, and then I was like, she'll probably think I'm crazy and break up with me. And so I didn't bother, but just recently I brought it up to my brother again, and he listened to me. And he didn't tell me it didn't happen, but instead he was more curious and wanted to know every little thing that I could remember. And so I told him everything I could remember. And he didn't really know what to make out of it. And I almost wonder if maybe at some point he saw something and just didn't want to tell me, yes, I saw something too, or, you know, I remember this happening and scared the living crap out of me, but I don't want to bring it up because I don't want this to come back at me in some way, shape, or form. And so that was pretty much it with him, but at some point I was looking on the internet and I came across Dogmen, and it really caught my interest, and I was like, huh. And I went, and that's how I found your show there, Vic. I saw Dogman Encounters, and one of the first links on Google brings you to your YouTube channel. And so I went and I listened to an episode, and this episode was honestly terrifying. This poor man had these things like trying to come into his house, and he had a kid and a wife and whatever else, and from there, I listened to the next one, and it pretty much forced the man out of his house with his whole family, and that's terrifying. But after I listened to that one, I went all the way back to the beginning, and I listened from that all the way up until last week's episode. And there are people that have had really crazy encounters that could have ended so much worse. And the biggest thing that I could take away from all that is that this dogman, this creature, didn't want to kill me. It didn't want to eat me. It easily had multiple opportunities to do so. Just because I heard it and I saw it one time, who's to say how many times it saw me? And I don't know if it was the same one that we heard while we were in the woods, my brother and I. And so the one that was in my window, I have no idea. I would assume so. I've never heard anybody else tell me about a Dogman encounter in Long Island. I've heard about them in upstate New York and other parts of New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, so on and so forth, but never in Long Island. So I don't know if there are other ones roaming around. I say I hope not, but you never know. So that was pretty much my encounter.
It's so good you realize that the Dogman didn't hurt you because it didn't want to. Even though it was so terrifying to look at, like we talked about in our first conversation, it might look ferocious and terrifying, but apparently it's not nearly as dangerous as what you would think it would be. What physical trait did that Dogman have that shook you up most, Matt?
The eyes. Like I said, once we made eye contact and his eyes met my eyes, it felt like it just pulled everything I knew right out of me. I was very on board with being religious and all that stuff, and since that encounter, that's gone for me. I believe in a higher power, but not so much like a God or Jesus Christ or any of that. When I was a kid and I saw the Dogman there, and a couple of days went by and I would think about it constantly, I always thought, if there was God or Jesus Christ, how could they create something like this? Because I didn't think it was a paranormal entity or anything like that. It was a flesh and blood creature. It made noise. It growled. It slobbered, and other people's encounters, they said that they shot it and it bled, so that would lead me to believe that it's flesh and blood.
It's really hard to put a finger on exactly what they are. I guess it's anyone's guess. The first time we spoke, Matt, I asked you if you thought you'd be up to looking at a very accurate representation of a Dogman. When you said yes, that you were, I showed that illustration to you that we talked about in that conversation. What were your thoughts when you looked at that illustration? Would you say, after all is said and done, that looking at it helped you or it hurt you?
When I first looked at it, I remember saying, wow. And it was wow as far as that is very close to what this creature looked like. Granted, it was dark. I didn't have really great lighting to see. The illustration that you showed me was very detailed. The eyes were definitely different in the illustration. They were more of like a yellow amber color. In my encounter, they were a cloudy white color, almost like if you ever seen a blind person and their eyes cloud over. That's really more what it looked like. But other than that, like I said, his ears were pointed towards me, but the ears were pointy, like your illustration there. I didn't see his paw or hand, so I don't really know what his claws and his hands looked like. But as far as the shoulders and the head was definitely a little larger than in the illustration, given the comparison to the rest of the body. And the shoulders were a little bigger. But other than that, it was spot on. I'm not sure exactly of the color of them, because I would say it was that, again, space black compared to your gray-white in the illustration. But other than that, those little details there, it was definitely spot on.
For some of the eyewitnesses I speak with, they definitely wouldn't be able to handle looking at that. After talking with you for as long as we spoke that first conversation, I was pretty sure that you could handle it and that it would actually help you. How far was your bed from the window it was looking through?
My bed was on the right wall in the room, and it was up against the end wall of the cutout of the closet, and there was a small space in between. In the corner, I had my bow and a hockey stick and my hockey bag. And so it was probably about a foot, and then it was the window right on the wall. And so there was probably about a foot of space between my bed and that window. And that's why I was saying that I know if this creature wanted to, it could have easily broke right through my window, grabbed me by my leg, and pulled me right into the woods without even blinking.
It was only a foot away from the window. Wow, that is way too close for comfort.
Yes, I had one of the smaller rooms in the house. The only room smaller than mine was the bathroom.
When it smiled at you, did it keep its mouth closed or did it open it?
It kept its mouth closed from what I remember, but as it smiled at me, its eyes got even more squinted. And I took that as he was waiting for a reaction from me. And I do know that he could have did whatever he wanted to. I was basically his for the taking. And I know he chose to just turn around and walk away, but I also think he was reading what I was about to do. And so if I would have got up and ran, maybe he would have broke through the window and grabbed me. Or if I would have just laid back down, maybe he would have scratched on the window or growled really loud. Again, I think he was just kind of more terrorizing me more than anything else and kind of letting me know, like, I'm here, and this area where you come a lot, you shouldn't keep coming here. This is my area. You have your house and your driveway, you stay there. The rest of this is mine.
Oh, he was reading you all right. There's no doubt about that. You said you didn't try to wake your brother or parents after the fact because he thought they'd get mad at you. But did you ever think about trying to get them to come see the Dogman when it was still standing there at the window so they could see it for themselves?
I did for a split second, of course. But again, and that's just being a kid, like, hey, look what I found kind of thing. But at the same time, I think that if I would have moved out of my bed, it would have attacked me. And no one's to know that for sure, but there's also a very good chance with this thing obviously being a predator that any movement like that would have made it attack. I know once I made eye contact, I popped straight up out of my bed as far as into a sitting position, but that was more, to him anyway, I guess, non-threatening. I think if I would have made any moves to get out of the room, he would have took that as this person's really scared of me. Let me get him and eat him. And then if somebody came back into the room with me, he might have felt threatened and attacked us anyway, regardless, instead of just turning around and walking into the woods.
I'd say you definitely played it the right way by staying put and quiet. That was a smart move. Did you go outside the next day and look below your window for prints?
I did think about going outside. I went outside. I passed the front of the house. My brother had two sets of windows, one on the front, one on the side. I passed the ones on the front, turned the corner and passed the ones on the side. And I kind of froze. And I looked out my window, and I looked at the woods. And I looked out my window again, and then I looked out the woods again. And I turned right back around, went right back inside. I really wanted to walk over there and see, but it being the next day, I didn't want to take that chance. And so I didn't go and look for any prints or claw marks or anything of the sort. And then kind of after that, like I said, I didn't really go back in the woods. And if I did, I didn't go that way.
After an experience like that, I don't think anyone could blame you for being a little timid. When you were walking back to your house the day you were shooting arrows, you said you heard a loud thump and leaves rustling. What do you think caused that sound?
Being older and doing a little bit of research and everything, I think the Dogman came out of the tree. I think he dropped down out of the tree and he was walking towards me. I had a little bit of a lead from the time that I heard the thump to the leaves kind of crushing, like they were being walked on, and the branches cracking. So, again, I don't remember how far I was from it, but it was definitely loud enough to know that something heavy just hit the ground. And I knew it wasn't a branch or a fallen tree, because there was no crack before I heard this thump. It was just thump, and then a couple of seconds went by, and then I heard the crushing of the leaves and the breaking of branches and twigs and rustling through thorn bushes and things of that nature.
That's what I thought was behind those sounds when you mentioned hearing them. I'll bet you're right about what caused them. Did you ever go out and practice shooting your bow after you had the first strange experience practicing archery?
Of course I did. I love archery. It's one of my hobbies. I actually have a target set up at my father's house. And any chance I got, I definitely did go out and practice. But I shot my arrows at the garage where I was on concrete, and not that far away from my house, and I kept my head turning in every single direction, and any sound that I heard, I immediately stopped what I was doing and sat there and looked and listened. And if at any point, which I don't remember this happening, but if at any point anything went quiet, I was inside right away.
Oh, I'll bet you did stop, look, and listen anytime you heard a strange sound. I don't blame you. Do you think dogmen are still living on Long Island, Matt?
That's hard to say. I would say yes, I believe they are. There's enough wildlife here for them to prey upon. Like I said, there's enough areas still on Long Island where it's wooded. A lot of the parks that are on Long Island are very wooded. Other than that, there's not a lot of cover, so unless they swam over to Shelter Island or they took a highway over into Queens or Manhattan, there's really no way to get off of Long Island. And I definitely feel like if there was some sort of killing of a dogman or trapping or anything like that, I would have heard about it, given the social media that there is now. And I grew up in the age where all that stuff was coming in. And so I feel like I would have heard about it somewhere. Maybe I wouldn't have really paid attention to it, but I definitely feel like I would have heard it.
You just mentioned Shelter Island. Did you catch that episode I did not too long ago where the eyewitness came on and talked about the encounter that she had on Shelter Island?
I definitely did, which also terrorized me a little bit because as a young teenager, like 13, 14 years old, my mother, my brother, and I went to Shelter Island, and we were there for about a week. And Shelter Island is very wooded, and even later in my life, when I was 17, 18 years old, me and a couple of buddies went to Shelter Island for hiking purposes, and we took one of the longer trails that kind of wraps all the way around the island. And so if I would have listened to that person's encounter back then, there is no way I would have went anywhere near that island, or definitely not went hiking through that island without a doubt.
Well, you know what they say, ignorance is bliss. That's not always the case, though, unfortunately. You have a son. Have you told him about your experience, or are you planning to keep the existence of dogmen hidden from him until he gets older?
No, I haven't told him about my experience. I definitely want to. I don't know how he'll take it. That's a fine line, I believe. I don't know if he believes that there are other creatures like that that are roaming this earth, or what else could be roaming this earth. I know that he knows that there are a lot of unexplainable things that happen in this world, and that this world is a very big place, and we know very little about it being people. So if I do tell him, it won't be until he's older. He's about the same age as I was when I had my encounter. And so unless he has an encounter of his own, which I really hope he does not, I don't really see the need to tell him about it as of right now.
I'm sure you're going to handle it the right way, and when you know he's ready to hear about it, I'm sure you'll just, like you said, let him know about it then. Have you told him that monsters don't exist, even though you've seen with your own eyes that that's a canard?
No, I have not told him that monsters don't exist. There's enough things in the world, again, to be aware that monsters come in all shapes and forms. And monsters can be people as well as dogmen. And so there's no way I would ever tell him that monsters don't exist when a next door neighbor could be a monster and you don't even know about it.
Well, I'm glad you don't tell him that. If you knew that that was the case, that monsters didn't exist, that'd be one thing, but you've seen with your own eyes that they do, so I respect the fact that you didn't lie to him. How much does it frustrate you when your brother tells you your encounter didn't happen?
It frustrates me because I know my brother, and I know that he is very logical in his thinking. I know that he also feels a connection like I do to nature and has a love for animals and the outside world, as far as outside of civilization, I guess is a good way to put it. And so it definitely frustrates me, and I really wish that he would more listen to what I have to say and be able to kind of share the experiences that he's had with me. And I really do think that at some point he had his own encounter with this Dogman, or maybe another one, and that's why he doesn't want to talk to me about it. And I'm trying to find the right way or the right time to say that to him, to ask him, like, hey, have you had your own encounter? Tell me about it. I want to know. I'm not going to judge you or anything like that.
If he did have an encounter of his own, it sure would be wonderful if he came forward and shared it with you sometime in the near future. I think you'd both benefit from that. Do you have any problems dealing with day-to-day life now because of that encounter?
Not at all. It happened a long time ago. I haven't been hiking in a while, but I've definitely have hiked, like I said, since that encounter. I've been in the woods again since that encounter. So it doesn't really affect me. The only point that I can say where it kind of affected me was I listened to one of your shows, and this person was explaining how family members were telling him kind of more like campfire stories, but how the Dogmen would scratch on a window or ring your doorbell or try to jiggle your door handle and get you to come outside and basically stand on top of your porch roof and snatch you up and go off into the woods with you and scare you close to death. And so hearing that kind of made me think a little bit, but it doesn't affect me on the day-to-day. Only more if I'm driving late at night or if everything goes quiet right away. I think that there's a Dogman in the area and I should probably go inside.
I can't tell you how glad it makes me to hear that you're able to deal with that in such a healthy way. That's great news. How much more difficult was your childhood, in your opinion, as a direct result of seeing that Dogman?
At first, it was definitely harder because I wanted somebody to tell and be able to understand me and not tell me that it was a dream or that I was lying or that it was just a figment of my imagination or the trees moved or anything like that. So being a kid, it was kind of difficult to move on from it and be able to process it all and deal with it on my own. But as I got older, it was definitely a lot easier.
Well, that's the way it normally goes. As you get older, of course, you mature, and as you mature, your ability to deal with adverse situations and experiences like that improves. So that's what I would expect. Speaking of that topic, you're 32 now, but you were only 9 years old back then. How much easier do you think it would be to deal with an encounter like that if you had it now versus back then?
Well, now, being an adult and knowing the things I've known and kind of living my life the way I have and having my own experiences, I think it would be harder to deal with now. Knowing full on what a creature like that would be capable of doing as far as dismembering me or whatever else. Of course, I don't know exactly what it could do, but I have a good idea. And that would probably terrify me more than seeing one. Knowing that if this thing wants to, I'm gone and there's nothing me or anybody else can do about it. That would definitely be the terrifying part of dealing with it now as opposed to then when I was 9 and I had my encounter. Yeah, I was definitely scared and terrorized and I wanted to yell and I couldn't and everything else, but I was more curious of what this creature was and why it singled me out. So I wanted to know more. And now, knowing more, it would be more, how am I going to get away from this thing without it ripping my face off?
The answer to your question, what could it do to me, is very sobering. It could do whatever it wanted to do to you. Thank goodness it didn't want to hurt you. It just wanted to watch you. Well, Matt, it's about time for us to get out of here, but before you give us your closing comments, I just want to put something out there for the listeners. For some time now, there's been a problem with the replies to the YouTube comments not being visible. I don't know why that is. I did contact YouTube, and I've complained about that several times. After the second or third complaint, they got back with me and said that they'd put their best people on it. That was months ago, and unfortunately, the problem is still there, so unfortunately, it looks like that's just how it's going to be. But having said that, Matt, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yes, I do. If you know anybody that's had this encounter, or if you yourself have had an encounter, and you talk to somebody about it, don't get discouraged if they tell you you were dreaming or it's not real or anything like that, because at the end of the day, you know what you saw, and you just know. There's a feeling that goes along with all this that just will always stay there. The other thing, too, is if anybody is stupid enough to really be that curious to go and look for one of these things, especially in more rural areas of the United States or even Europe, don't do it. Definitely do not do it. There is no way that you should. If you could think of what an encounter with a lion would be, multiply that by 100, and that's what you'll get with an encounter with a dogman. There is just no way you should ever do that.
Well, that's all very well said. Thanks again so much for coming on and sharing that experience with us. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Vic, for having me. It was great to be here and share my encounter. Hopefully it's able to help somebody.
Oh, I'm sure it will. Thanks again so much. Have a great night.
You as well. Bye.
Bye. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmenencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.